The Atlanta Falcons shocked the world and took Michael Penix 8 overall. Not only did they shock the world, they shocked Kirk Cousins, they shocked Arthur Blank, they shocked Falcons fans. So we are here locked on Falcons. Aaron Freeman, and I want to talk about this because it is an NFC South rival, obviously. But this is probably the most shocking pick, well, I would say for sure, the most shocking pick of the first round. I don't think it makes any sense at all. It really doesn't. If they would have taken J.J. McCarthy, okay, sure, I understand. Get your guy who's going to sit for a couple of years behind Kirk Cousins, do that, and then see what happens with McCarthy in 2 years. McCarthy will be 23 years old. Okay, like that kind of makes sense. But to do it with Penix, who's 24, he will be 24 the first week of May. So he's 24 this year. He'll be 25 next year. So when he actually plays, if Kirk Cousins plays for 2 seasons and all that, he'll be 26 years old. So why draft the guy who's the most ready to play right now? I don't understand it. I mean, if you're going to take Penix, and I don't think the Penix pick is bad. I think Penix is awesome. But why would you pair that with Kirk Cousins? Like, just take Penix, save $150 million, and spend that somewhere else. Spend that on defense if you're the Falcons. Why do the Kirk Cousins thing? Guarantee him, you get a guy off of an Achilles injury, an older guy, he's going to play, you paid him all this guaranteed money, he's the guy, you bring him in, and then immediately, not just waste draft capital, but you immediately take, with a top 10 pick, you could have gotten defensive help, you could have gotten all kinds of stuff you need to try and win the Super Bowl right now. This is like two philosophies at war with each other. One philosophy is we are trying to win a Super Bowl in the next 2 years with Kirk Cousins. The other philosophy is let's prepare for life after Kirk Cousins. What? The whole reason you got Kirk Cousins was to go all in on the next 2 years. And then the first thing you do is draft a replacement. That would be like if the Jets at number 10 took Bo Nix. And Aaron Rodgers is sitting here going, hey guys, y'all know we're like trying to win a Super Bowl now, right? Like why would you take that pick? Why wouldn't you do that next year or the year after? Like what sense does this make? None of it made sense. I mean, I've heard so many different rumors. I've heard rumors that because of the tampering, they could potentially void Kirk Cousins' contract. I don't know how true this is. But maybe they're trying to get out of the Cousins deal and start Penix. I mean, those kind of crazy conspiracies in situations like this that are so nuts, those crazy conspiracies are basically like you got to believe in those things because otherwise it just makes no sense. So let's go ahead and hear what a Falcons fan thinks about this and we'll react along the way.
Continues the complacency that I've been complaining about for the Atlanta Falcons all offseason long. And, you guys were mad at me when I was being my Mr. Drew on the second week of free agency. I'm like, why is this team so complacent? Why does this team continue to just basically believe that there's nothing wrong with this team other than the quarterback? And I get why fans think that, but you would hope that the people that actually watch film for a living would realize, hey, there are, the quarterback is maybe the biggest issue we got to deal with, but there are other issues, right?
Yeah, I said that I've said that all off season. The Falcons won 7 games. Like they weren't this close. They won 7 games. So there's obviously some problems. So believing like, yeah, we'll just get Kirk Cousins, and then that will make us go from a 7-win team to an 11-win team. That seems like a big jump for one player, especially when that one player is off of an Achilles injury. We don't know what he's going to look like. So I thought the same thing that Aaron's echoing here, that there's more to fixing this team than just, Kirk Cousins is here. Guess what? The Falcons are a Super Bowl team. It's like, hey, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, they're a couple wins away from being a couple wins away. Like the Saints were bad last year, but they won 9 games. The Falcons had an easier schedule than the Saints and won 7 games. So is Kirk Cousins the only Band-Aid that was needed? I don't know.
We've been talking about that for 5 months on this podcast. But unfortunately, the Falcons continue to believe that the quarterback is the only issue because they basically decided, hey, let's get our quarterback for 2026, right? We need to get that handled right now. And, why the Falcons are way more concerned about who their quarterback is in 2026 than, fielding an explosive offense for the first time in 5 years or, trying to improve a pass rush that was already below average, that already has lost 30% of the production from last year. And right now, again, we'll see what they do after the draft and on Friday and Saturday. But
mean, if you're a Falcons fan, you got to feel like there's basically two teams. Like, you got to feel like they're kind of building two teams, two philosophies, two tracks. I mean, you're talking out of both sides of your mouth right now if you're the Atlanta Falcons. Are you all in right now? Are you trying to win a Super Bowl? Can you actually say that if you take Michael Penix at 8? Can you truly look at your fans in the eye and say, yep, we are trying to win a Super Bowl with Kirk Cousins? Because then I'd look at Michael Penix like, well, then why'd y'all take him? Why'd y'all use an 8th overall pick on him? We could have got defensive help. We could have addressed other needs to truly go all in and build for the future. But we got Michael Penix. And then the argument to that would be, oh, well, once Kirk retires or once Kirk is done in a couple of years, we can just transition to Penix. Again, another question. Okay, well, then why did y'all decide to do that with him? He's the oldest quarterback in the draft. He's the one off of all these injuries. Why would you take this guy and force him to sit for 2 years? If I'm Michael Penix, I'm pissed. I had someone asked me in the stream last night, they asked me, who's this worse for, Cousins or Penix? Great question. Cousins, I don't think it really affects him that much. I mean, he's going to play. He got his money. It is what it is. Penix, this is really unfortunate for Michael Penix because he is older. He is ready to go now. And there's a lot of teams, like think about if you're Penix, right? Like you're told, oh, the Raiders are going to take you. The Raiders. If he gets drafted by the Raiders, he's their day one starter. He gets drafted by the Falcons, he's their day 8. He's their day 900 or 1100 day starter. He has to wait 2.5 seasons, 3 seasons to play. That's crazy.
Right now, it's looking like it's going to be a bottom 5 unit in the NFL this year, and not necessarily having more than 2, 3, maybe solid starters in the secondary. Like, do they have anybody to cover? But hey, those aren't issues. We can deal with that stuff later, right? We got to worry about whether or not we have a success for Kirk Cousins. And, it makes sense if you're getting a blue chip quarterback. That's what so many people, as I've been saying the last couple of days, like they're not getting a quarterback, but it's like, hey, but what if they get, what if it's Drake May or what if it's somebody, really good quarterback decision?
Drake May makes sense. Like those guys do make sense. I can 100% understand that. I can 100% understand. Let's get Drake May, a guy who obviously needs some time to develop. He at least needs 1 year to develop. Let's get that guy. But to get the guy who doesn't, the one guy who truly doesn't need the time to develop, and not only doesn't need the time, but more importantly, doesn't have the time to develop. To get that guy, instead of J.J. McCarthy, who's 21, think about the difference. And okay, J.J. McCarthy takes over for Kirk Cousins. J.J. McCarthy's 23 years old. He sat for 2 years. Let's rock and roll. That's such a different conversation than Michael Penix is 26, and now we're going to see what he can do.
And, I can understand why fans think that changes the math, but, the Falcons are being like, we got Michael Penix. And, there are some people that are really high on Michael Penix. Not, again, we'll talk about the consensus rankings, but I looked at 23 draft boards. Only 3 of them had Penix in their top 32. I think 19, 25, and 30, if I recall correctly.
I think Penix is good. I think he's a quarterback, so people reach on him for sure. I would say he probably is a bottom first round talent, but of course, like I said, quarterback's going to raise that a little bit. I thought he was going to go to the Raiders. That's where I thought he was going to land, and I thought that would have been a reach. But top 10, big time reach.
Were the rankings on those 3? So, basically 85% of the people I look at, consider Michael Penix to be a second round caliber player. And I think taking him with the 8th overall selection is going to be considered by most people, at least outside the city of Atlanta, a massive reach. One of the biggest reaches we've seen at the quarterback position. And it's just baffling that the Falcons did that when, it made sense to me. Like when people were talking about Penix in round 1, I was like, yeah, the Raiders are going to take him at 13 because, they have a massive need at quarterback, and he's better than probably Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew. I don't know if he's massively better than those guys. We'll get to my Penix evaluation later, but it makes sense. I can justify that, but the Falcons, it's like, all right, I guess. I know Arif Hassan is usually the person I rely on with the consensus ranking because he looks at 101 different draft boards, and Penix was 34th on his. So, that's.
I mean, you could also look at it this way, right? Like flip it. Okay, so pretend that they didn't have a quarterback, and pretend they drafted Michael Penix. That'd be cool, right? Like you'd be sitting there going, okay, this makes sense. We do not have a quarterback. We've got Desmond Ridder. He sucks. We got Taylor Heineke, whatever. Draft Michael Penix 8 overall. Okay, we got our quarterback of the future. Let's rock and roll. And then if a week later they go sign Kirk Cousins to a $150 million deal, a lot of people would be like, what just happened? Why did we do that? That makes no sense. So no matter how you flip it, no matter how you order the Cousins Penix thing, that is the big problem. The problem is it doesn't fit with the other. Like Penix is fine on his own, does not fit with Kirk Cousins. Cousins is fine with his own or on his own, but signing Cousins doesn't fit with drafting Penix. Like those two, it's the oil and water. Neither one is bad on their own. Like signing Kirk Cousins isn't inherently bad. Drafting Michael Penix is not inherently bad. But doing them simultaneously creates this weird mix in your timeline.
It's almost a full round reach. And clearly the Falcons were breaking one of the tendencies that we've talked a lot about on this podcast over the last month of why we thought, say Dallas Turner was going to be the pick, which is, they don't stray from consensus, right? And they strayed from consensus on this one is the point I'm trying to get across. They also strayed away from their tendency to draft young players, right? Michael Penix is going to turn 24 in roughly 2 weeks. Yep. I think he's about 13 days away from his 24th birthday.
Yeah, I think May 8th.
But he does have long arms. So, 91st percentile in terms of arm length for a quarterback. So they did not break that draft tendency there. So, clearly they believe in the guy. And, we talked a little bit about how.
But that's also part of the problem, right? That's part of the paradox. Okay, they believe in the guy. All right, fine. What if I told you Michael Penix was the starting quarterback of the Atlanta Falcons next season? Part of you might say, well, that's good. Okay, we got a quarterback of the future. He's starting. But that would mean something went horribly wrong with Kirk Cousins. So even if the best case scenario for Michael Penix works out, where Michael Penix plays almost immediately, or Michael Penix plays, within a year or so, and he's the franchise guy, that still means you wasted $150 million signing Kirk Cousins. So even if the best situation happens, there's still a negative attached to it. The Falcons have put themselves in virtually a lose-lose situation. Because if Cousins is good, let's say Cousins is good this year, and let's say the Falcons go to the NFC Championship game, which would be a hell of a season, right? And they lose in the NFC title game. That would be a success. But you would have to wonder, damn, could we have pushed through this? Could we have taken the next step? Could we have won the NFC? Could we have gone to a Super Bowl if we would have had a better defensive line or a better secondary? Like, even if Cousins is good, there will be a negative attached to that. If Penix plays, there's a negative attached to that. The Falcons have said, hey, I know we said we're all in, but how about we just have a good old-fashioned lose-lose?
Oh, they tend to like players that they know. Jimmy Lake did not overlap with Michael Penix at University of Washington. As far as I know, Penix agreed to transfer from Indiana to Washington after Jimmy Lake was fired as their head coach. So, they just love the player. And, from all accounts, Penix is an A++ character guy, leader, smart, all those things.
Yeah.
From the neck up, you love the quarterback.
But even that is a negative. He's a great leader. He's a great character guy. He's a leader of men. He's a locker room guy. He's this and this. Can you utilize any of those tools when he's your backup quarterback? Kirk Cousins is the leader of this team. Kirk Cousins is paid to be the locker room guy. Kirk Cousins is paid to be the face of the franchise. So even all those characteristics that are good for Penix, you can't even utilize. You can't even lean on that because you drafted all those characteristics into the situation where you do not want him to use those. You do not want Michael Penix to be your locker room leader because that means he has usurped your $150 million guaranteed quarterback that you signed a couple months ago.
It's from the neck down where you start to have some concerns. We'll get into that a little bit later. And, one of those concerns is the injury question mark. It's sort of ironic that, most Falcon fans over the last 2 or 3 months have been concerned about Kirk Cousins and his ability to hold up because of him coming off the Achilles injury. And then the biggest concern about Michael Penix in his projection to the NFL is his durability concerns given his series of injuries. And if you're not familiar,
well, the only good news is that you don't have to worry about his durability concerns because he's not going to play. Like for 2 years, he's not going to get hurt because for 2 years he'll be holding the clipboard watching Kirk Cousins. So unless he gets hurt on his days off, but durability is not a concern. I'll give the Falcons this: they have made a guaranteed way to keep Michael Penix healthy.
With that, Michael Penix spent 4 years at Indiana, 4 injury-riddled years. He suffered season-ending injuries in all 4 years. He's had a clean bill of health the last 2 years in Washington. But Michael Penix tore his right ACL in 2018. Then he had season-ending surgery on his right shoulder, his non-throwing shoulder. He's a southpaw in 2019. Then he tore that right ACL again in 2020. And then he had season-ending surgery on his left throwing shoulder in 2021 and then transferred to Washington the following year and has had a clean bill of health in part due to, them having one of the better offensive lines in football. And he's been a very productive player. He was one of the, I think finalists for the Heisman Trophy this past year.
No doubt about that.
Led Washington to a national championship game. But I'm not in love with the ceiling for Michael Penix. And we'll break down, why I'm not in love with this draft pick, because are you spending a top 10 pick on a player that may be just kind of a mid-tier starter in the NFL? And we'll get into all of that, guys, as we continue today's.
See, I don't think that's even relevant. I don't think that's even part of the conversation right now. If I told you Michael Penix will be a top 10 quarterback, okay, but that still doesn't fix this timeline. It still doesn't fix the Kirk Cousins situation. It still doesn't fix Penix being 26. He's a top 10 quarterback for what, 3 years, 4 years? Your franchise guy is 26. You're already missing out on multiple years of his rookie deal. You're missing out on multiple years of his prime. What would his ceiling have to be? What would have to happen? The ceiling, basically what would have to happen to make this all okay is if Kirk Cousins wins a Super Bowl and then Michael Penix is also super sweet. That's the only way this makes it look okay, is if those two things happen. And that's asking a whole lot.
So let's talk about what I thought of Michael Penix as the player, right? And obviously opinions will vary. That's the case with quarterbacks all the time. Everybody has a different opinion. Some people are going to love Michael Penix.
This part is, I think, the easy part. The easy part is to look at Penix and say, yeah, he's good. That's the easiest part of this pick is to just take the individual pick, Michael Penix as a quarterback, and say, yep, he's sweet in college, sweet now, has been totally healthy for 2 years. Every player has the risk of injury. I feel confident in this guy's ability. Probably the best deep ball thrower, maybe even the best pure passer of the prospects.
I'm a little lower on Michael Penix. I saw him as kind of a second-round talent. I think probably the thing I like the most about Penix is his processing. But then outside of that, there's a lot of question marks with Penix, right? There were a lot of accuracy concerns. A lot of people that charted his throwing saw him as the least accurate of the top 7 quarterbacks in this year's draft.
I don't know about that. That's a bit of a stretch.
Class. The other big red flag with Penix was his struggles handling pressure, right? He's a good athlete. He just doesn't necessarily use that athleticism on the field. The other question about Penix is he doesn't necessarily throw over the middle. And that's something that, in today's NFL, the best offenses in the NFL really do a great job attacking the middle of the field. The lesser offenses in the NFL typically don't do that great. Another thing that you sort of showed up on Penix's charting from other folks was his inefficiency throwing underneath, right, within 10 yards. And
yeah, he's definitely a push the ball down the field kind of thrower, which I thought was a bit contradictory, if I said that word right, with the Raiders. Was that Antonio Pierce wants to be a ground the ball, run the football, kind of grind the game out, just run the ball on first down. He wants to be a very safe kind of guy. So Penix is not that. Penix is a push the ball down the field, sling the ball around, let it rip, take the top off the defense. So I was kind of confused why he was so linked up with the Raiders because of their style. But yeah, he's definitely not a guy. He's not Bo Nix. Bo Nix is hey, let's make efficient, accurate short passes. Penix is much more of hey, let's what's going on 30 yards down the field.
We'll see how the makeup of the Falcons offense is going to look like, when Penix is starting a couple of years down the road. But right now, in terms of the players that they have on the roster, the receivers especially, Rondale Moore, those types of guys, like having a quarterback that can effectively attack the sort of underneath middle of the field is probably what this offense is designed to do. Now, again, even though Penix was weak in that area, he was very strong throwing outside the numbers and down the field. That's sort of the strength. So if you're going to build an offense around Michael Penix based off of what he did well at Washington, it's going to have a lot of sort of big, fast receivers on the outside that can win contested catch, win back shoulder.
You got to have some
throws,
verticality.
Win in
if
the
you're going to
air
make
and
Penix
win
play
down
like
the
he did at
field,
Washington.
And stretch defenses vertically that way. So we'll see if the Falcons build that type of unit. Right now, Drake London fits that sort of description. We'll see if anybody else that the Falcons have.
Well, the good news is they have counting this one, they have 3 off seasons. This draft, another draft of, multiple free agencies, multiple trade timeline. There's no telling what the team will look like in 2020, 2026.
At the receiver core today and potentially tomorrow, will fit that description. So I think there are legit questions over whether or not Michael Penix is the best fit for this offense. We had Derek Klassen of Bleacher Report on, was that last week or was it earlier this week? I can't remember. They all blur together, guys. But, he talked
True
about,
and real.
I asked him sort of which quarterbacks he thought fit best in the offense, and he didn't think Penix was a great fit in terms of, sort of the Sean McVay offense. But we'll see. We don't know what Zach Robinson's offense is going to be. We think
you don't even know if Zach Robinson will be there in 2 years. Like, I'm telling you, this is such a crazy thing. You've got a brand spanking new offensive coordinator. Will he be good? Will he be so good that he gets a head coaching job? Who knows? You got Raheem Morris coming in as your head coach. Will he be there in 2 years? I don't know. Like, you're drafting a guy, and you're telling, you don't even need to worry about what he looks like right now. You don't even have to worry about how he fits the current team. There's no telling who will be on the team, who the coaches are. When you're, and that's, and it's a different. I've also heard a lot of people say, "Oh, well, a lot of quarterbacks sat for 2 years, 3 years, and then they're like." Drew Brees, like Tony Romo, all these other guys. And it's like, guys, that was that was 20 years ago. You're talking about Brees was what, 2001? It's a different game. Offensive coordinators and head coaches didn't have the turnover that they currently do. If Zach Robinson and the Falcons light it up this year, Zach Robinson will be on the coaching carousel to possibly be a head coach next year. That's just how this works. The developmental process, you don't get 2-3 years with the same staff, with the same players, with the same whatever. Now there's so much turnover. There's so much hopping around. That it's just so different now. It's so different compared to back then. So those lists are crazy to me when I'm seeing, Carson Palmer sat for 2 years. Guys, it's hard to compare things that happened 20 years ago with today's NFL. So that's just, and I'm not even saying Zach Robinson could get fired. Again, it's kind of like, if he's really bad, he will get fired. If he's really, really good, which you want as a Falcons fan, if he's really good, if he's a top-notch offensive coordinator, will he be the OC in 3 years? Probably not, right? If you're one of the best offensive coordinators, one of the best young OCs for 2 straight seasons, you're probably getting a head coaching job.
It's going to be a lot like Sean McVay's offense. Why wouldn't it be, right? But, it's not going to be a carbon copy, but, similar to Sean McVay, Shanahan, Kevin O'Connell type of offenses, again, that typically attack over the middle of the field. So
that would be kind of funny if, they draft Penix, the offense is sweet, Zach Robinson's the best offensive coordinator in the NFL, and then in 2 years, Robinson gets a head coaching job, Cousins retires, Penix has to learn a whole new offense. He sat for 2 years to develop under Robinson, boom. And now all of a sudden there's somebody else.
We'll see if Penix, can grow in that area. The player I've consistently comped Penix to was Tua Tagovailoa, the Miami Dolphins quarterback.
He's a much better deep ball thrower than Tua. They're both left-handed, but it stops there.
And I know a lot of people think that's just a lazy comparison because they're both left-handed. They
Yeah.
both have injury red flags coming into the league. Obviously, Tua, I think, had a broken hip his final year at Alabama. And
Tua plays much more like Bo Nix. Like Tua is much more similar in that, like, quick, efficient as far as like reading the short to intermediate. He's really good at that. He's really good at those kind of throws. He kind of struggles when it comes time to do what Penix is good at. So yeah, I think they're very, very different players.
you know, missed a good chunk of his rookie season recovering from that, sitting behind, I think, what was it, Ryan Fitzpatrick or whoever it was. But I don't think it's a lazy comparison because when I think of the type of player that I envision based off of my film,
Off the top of my head, I would say Penix is closer to like a Jordan Love. Like he's closer to that kind of a player.
Analysis of Michael Penix, the type of player that I think he's going to be is similar to Tua, which is a high-level processor, very decisive, is able to quickly get the ball into the hands of his playmakers. But when he's not great dealing with pressure, right, he's not going to necessarily do a great job creating plays off structure. That's kind of been the MO of Penix at Washington. That's been the MO of Tua in the NFL. And we've seen Miami built a great infrastructure around Tua, and that's allowed them to be one of the more potent offenses in the league the last couple of years. It hasn't necessarily translated into postseason success quite yet. But I think most people kind of look at Tua as kind of, more of a byproduct of the scheme and the weapons that he has more so than sort of the engine that drives that offense.
Well, I think anytime you're a quarterback in a very scheme-heavy offense, like Miami, even San Francisco, teams like that, it's very scheme-heavy. It's very like you are running this scheme. You are running this offense. We are not asking you to do anything outside of it. We are not asking you to create. We are not asking you to improv. We are asking you to run this complicated scheme. Anytime you're a product of that, you are going to get he's just part of this engine. And we hear it with Brock Purdy. We hear like, anybody can do what Brock Purdy does. Anybody can do what Tua does. And that is a kind of a calling card of the San Francisco offense.
Don't mention that to Dolphins fans because they will absolutely, eviscerate you for suggesting that Tua isn't one of the best quarterbacks in the league. So we'll see if Penix grows beyond that. I think for a lot of reasons, he's left-handed. He tested well athletically. I think a lot of people are going to compare him to Michael Vick. I don't.
No, he's nothing. These are some lazy comparisons. He's nothing like Vic. Absolutely not. Nothing like Vic. Nothing like Tua. I don't think. Like I said, I think Jordan Love would be a good comp as far as like a quarterback right now. Jordan Love at times can be inaccurate. Jordan Love wants to let it rip. Jordan Love wants to push the ball down the field. He wants to, utilize the verticality of the field and the final third and all that stuff. So. You don't get Jordan Love to throw screens and slant routes. You get him to push the ball. Good enough of an athlete to escape, but he's not, Jordan Love is not Michael Vick, right? So that's probably who I would say is the comp. Now, how good Jordan Love is, I don't know. But as far as like how a player plays, if you want to take a guy in the NFL and switch him with Michael Penix, that's where I would start.
Get that comparison? Yeah. I mean, I think that's a very superficial comparison.
Yeah, that's a terrible comparison.
A black guy with a strong arm that has good speed and left-handed. Oh, he's Michael Vick. Plays for the Atlanta Falcons. Yeah, I don't think their games are really at all the same, but, opinions will vary. We'll see what.
Vick was like if you combined Cam Newton with Lamar Jackson. Like that was what Michael Vick was. Michael Vick had an insanely strong arm. He was, at the time, about as fast as you could possibly be. He was shifty, but he was big enough to where he could take a hit. So he was like 10 different quarterbacks rolled into one. Vic was like Cordell Stewart mixed with Lamar Jackson, mixed with, like I said, Cam Newton and some of these other players. So to say that Michael Penix is him, like that's absolutely not the case. I've also heard some people say like, Jaden Daniels was Lamar Jackson, and they're totally different too. So. Yeah, the lazy comparisons is always a part of the NFL draft process. Like short quarterbacks, right? Short, accurate quarterbacks, they always get comped to Drew Brees. Always. Like it's always the same type of players. It's the same type of comps. It's all exactly the same. So I cannot stand the player comps because of how lazy it usually is.
Penix does on the football field upcoming, but that's kind of my evaluation of Michael Penix. So we'll see. Like it to me feels like the Falcons were, I don't want to use desperate, but taking a flyer on Penix for a guy that's probably going to max out on a similar tier as Kirk Cousins at this point just seems, like, what are we doing here? But
like, they're not taking a flyer. They're not desperate because they're doing this, but they're also telling you he will sit for 2 years. If you're desperate, you're reaching for Michael Penix and he's starting day one. It's like, look, we're desperate for a quarterback. We understand he probably wasn't the eighth overall pick, but we need a quarterback. We have to get somebody, so we took the guy. Like, that's desperate. This is not. Taking a flyer, same thing, where you're like, we think there's a lot of upside. We'll take a flyer on him in the 3rd round, 4th round. You don't take a flyer on a guy 8th overall, especially when he's not going to play. Like, that is exactly what I'm talking about, where they're telling you, no matter how you slice this, they're telling you 2 different things at the same time. They're telling you, we're desperate for a quarterback, but we actually have a quarterback. They're telling you, we'll take a flyer on this guy, but actually we're going to take him 8th overall. Like, none of it makes sense. Every single thing about this pick is a paradox.
We'll see how it all plays out. The question mark is going to be about the quarterback controversy. And if you listen to a recent episode I did where I basically spent 10 minutes saying there's no chance the Falcons take a quarterback, yeah, I got to take that L, guys. Didn't think it was coming, but that's part of the reason why I sit here skeptical, because, like, to me it doesn't make any sense, but I know to others it's like, well, we got to worry about who's going to be our quarterback in 5 years, and it's like,
makes no sense. I mean, I'll give them that. Like, it makes no sense at all.
We got so much bigger fish to fry coming off 3 consecutive 7-10 seasons to be that's your biggest priority, but that's just my personal opinion. I know other opinions vary, but one of the issues I talked about on,
and I mean, that's fine. Like, again, that's totally fine. If you're like, look, we got to build for the future. We got to worry about who our guy is in, for the next era of the Atlanta Falcons. We got to find the next Matt Ryan. Okay, sure. But then why the hell did you sign Kirk Cousins? Why the hell did you draft a 24-year-old guy who's going to have to sit for 2 years? He's going to be 26 by the time he plays. You can't get your 10-year starting franchise quarterback when that player is starting at 26. That, I said it earlier, but that all lines up with J.J. McCarthy. Like, okay, yeah, McCarthy will be 23. Sure, 23-year-old, great time to sit and develop for 2 years. He needs the development anyways. Then he can take over. Makes 100% sense. I'm there. I'm with you. But even the reasoning for drafting him, getting the quarterback of the future, getting your second era figured out and all that stuff, you're not even doing that. You're not doing that with this pick. And that's where the philosophy is messed up. I don't know if Arthur Blank and the front office were not in lockstep here. I don't know what happened. But this is 2 very distinct lines of thinking happening at the worst possible time. Worst possible time. And that's assuming Kirk Cousins plays for 2 years. What if Kirk Cousins is the best quarterback in the NFL for the next 2 seasons? Then what? Falcons are just going to get rid of him? Falcons are just going to say, all right, thanks a lot? I mean, I guess it's a good problem to have, but we're going to make stuff up hypothetically. Let's say the Falcons win 12 games this year. Let's say they win and they go to the NFC title game. Let's say the year afterwards they win 12, 13 games and they go to the NFC title game or the Super Bowl. Is it just, okay, Kirk, well, thanks for your efforts, but it's Michael Penix time? Or do you even further delay Michael Penix and get into that 3rd year of him just sitting around? That is a possibility when you sign Kirk Cousins to be your franchise guy. Because if Kirk Cousins is as good as they want him to be, Michael Penix doesn't have a chance.
And that was the Falcons having, guaranteed Kirk Cousins through the 2025 season.
Yeah.
And like I said, they are financially obligated to play Kirk Cousins as a starting quarterback for the next 2 years because the team is going to owe him, $25 million in guaranteed money this year, $65 million in guaranteed next year. And so, you don't want to have a $65 million backup quarterback on your roster. So they are financially obligated to kind of sit Penix for 2 years. Right. And, it's pretty unprecedented for a team to take a pick in the top 10 and sit that guy for 2 years, which is to me the biggest reason why the Falcons passed on Justin Fields 3 years ago, because they were like, we think Matt Ryan's going to, we have guaranteed money through 2 years with Matt Ryan, and we're committed to Matt Ryan for the time being, and why are we gonna? We need help now, but obviously it's a new regime, and clearly that was a Arthur Smith decision, and now it's the Raheem Morris era, and now it's who cares about the next 2 years? Like, let's figure out what's going to happen 5 years.
Well, who cares about the next 2 years? Like, you better care. You better care, because you got a $150 million quarterback. Like, you've got this guy here now for the next 2 years who you seemingly are all in on. So you better care about the next 2 years, because you're in your Super Bowl window. You're in your all-in era. That's what happens when you pay a quarterback. You guarantee a quarterback $150 million.
Years from now. So, the issue the Falcons going to have to deal with down the future is, presumably because you use the top 10 pick on Penix, there's going to be a lot of pressure for you to play him at some point, right? Much more pressure than there was on the Packers to play Jordan Love after using the 26 pick on him. But,
well, yeah, you also had Aaron Rodgers.
In 2026, you're likely going to play Penix because,
yes,
that year is going to be an important, critical year for Penix, because that's the year where you're going to have to decide whether.
Yeah, then you get into the contract, right? So then it's like, okay, we have a top 10 pick who's got top 10 second contract money and all that stuff. We have to start deciding what we're going to do here. So that is when the pressure is going to, that is going to be when you got to make your decision, is in the 2026. And like I said, that could get real cloudy if Kirk Cousins is really good. That could get really cloudy if he's good. Not to mention, you hate to say this, but not to mention things that could happen like injuries. If Penix, if his development gets delayed because of an injury or something like that in preseason or during whatever, like there's so many variables that can happen. Best case scenario is Cousins plays for 2 years, and then after that second year, you decide, okay, is it time to hand this over to Michael Penix? And you kind of have to. You really kind of don't have a choice, because if for whatever reason you say, let's go Cousins for a third year or whatever it ends up being, at that point you're almost punting on that pick. You're almost punting on the idea of like the 8th overall pick. And that is the real risk. Like, that's the real risk to me, is that you run the risk of punting on the 8th overall pick while you are telling your fans we're going all in, when you need other obvious things. It's not like this is a luxury pick. This wasn't the 32nd pick in the first round. This wasn't a second round pick. This was the 8th overall pick. You could argue that I guess this isn't an argument. The best defensive prospects in the draft were there. The Falcons need help defensively. And they said pass. They said we're getting a player that cannot help us this year. We're getting a player that cannot help us. Or hopefully doesn't help us, because hopefully Kirk Cousins, our $150 million man, plays. We don't need a defensive lineman. We don't need defensive backs. We don't need to trade down. We don't need a defensive tackle. We don't need any of that stuff. We don't need someone off the edge. We are good, is what they're saying. Simultaneously, they're saying we're all in, but we're good.
Whether or not afterwards, whether you're going to have to give him the 5th-year option, right?
Yes.
And so so we have a clear sort of timeline, presumably, 2 years of Kirk Cousins and then a year of Michael Penix, and then we'll see, right?
Yeah.
Depending on how Penix performs, how the team performs. But you've heard me talk about, when you try to make plans in this league, 3 years in advance, like usually things inevitably come up, right? That usually you can only really plan like 6 months, maybe a year in advance in this league, because of, any given Sunday and sort of the random chaos that is football. So we'll see if the Falcons, what happens over the next 3 years, and sort of, if Kirk plays well, if Kirk plays poorly, if Penix plays well. Like, again, all of these variables are unknown at this point in time. How good a coach is Raheem Morris? How good a play caller is Zach Robinson?
There is so much, and that's another thing too, right? Like, you're trying to plan 3 years ahead of time. What if Raheem Morris and Zach Robinson get fired? Then you get a whole new regime come in. You never know. That usually works poorly when a whole new regime inherits a quarterback. Like we saw that with Chicago, where they inherited Justin Fields. They didn't want Justin Fields. So not only are you carving out this timeline for Michael Penix, but you're also carving out this timeline for your coaching staff, for your head coach, for your offensive coordinator, for everything. You're basically telling everybody that we're good for at least 3 years. We're going to be here. We're going to be hanging out. We're going to be good. Don't worry about it. We got a 3-year window. And in today's NFL, like Aaron just said, it is foolish to try and plan and believe that everything's going to stay the same, no problems for at least 3 years.
How good your play caller is Jimmy Lake. Can the Falcons, all of these are question marks that still remain unanswered for this football team. But hey, they have an option at quarterback in 2026. So that's clearly the priority. So we'll see what happens with the Falcons. And obviously I know a lot of people will sort of make the parallels between this and Jordan Love in the Green Bay Packers, sitting Jordan Love for 3 years. They sat Aaron Rodgers for 3 years. It's a little different then because
totally different situation, because the Aaron Rodgers thing, Aaron Rodgers is the franchise quarterback. Aaron Rodgers was there. Aaron Rodgers is a product of that franchise. They chose to go get Kirk Cousins. They chose to go get him. They chose to go pay him. They chose all that a month or 2 months or whatever before making this pick. Kirk Cousins wasn't already on the roster. Like Kirk Cousins wasn't here. He's in the building. It's already there. Whatever. Let's make the successor plans. Totally different than Aaron Rodgers. This would be like if the Jets took a quarterback. If the Jets would have taken a quarterback instead of an offensive lineman, everyone would be sitting around going like, well, why'd you sign Aaron Rodgers? Like, why did you do that? I thought you're all in. Go get him help win now. Like, don't worry about, and it would make more sense for the Jets to do it because Rodgers is probably only playing for a year. Rodgers is probably only playing for this year and then he's done. So it actually would make more sense for the Jets to have done it. But that's where this is so crazy. This is crazy because of the decision to go get Kirk Cousins. I believe if the Falcons had Michael Penix and they knew they were taking Michael Penix, they never would have signed Kirk Cousins. So, I mean, you talk about buyer's remorse, but this to me screams like if we could go back, we would not sign Kirk Cousins. Well, bad news. You have him under contract for $150 million guaranteed.
There's different CBA and all that stuff. But, I think that was an easier pill to swallow for the Packers because, Jordan Love was the 26th overall pick. And at that point, you're getting like second round talent in the draft.
Yes.
And so, taking a flyer on a quarterback in the late first round is different than.
And how old was Jordan Love? Like, I don't even know how old he was when he got drafted, but I don't think he was 24.
Doing so with the top 10 pick when blue chip players on the board, or at least red chip players on the board on defense, blue chip players on the board on offense. Not to mention that the Packers were coming off a 13-3 season that year. New head coach, sort of have proven, they had a second or third year GM.
Let's see how old Jordan Love is right now.
Kind of proven that, hey, we can get the job done on the football field. So yeah, and again, that's the other factor.
Jordan Love right now is 25.
The Packers don't really have an owner, but if they did have an owner, that
so,
owner would be like, yeah, I trust you guys because
they didn't draft Jordan Love when he was 24 years old. He's 25 right now.
The Falcons have yet to prove it. That's kind of the point I'm trying to make, which is like we're showing a lot of trust in the future of this.
So where Jordan Love is right now, Michael Penix would still be a year away from his first start.
Franchise that isn't really based off of anything other than vibes at this point in time. So it puts a lot of pressure. The point of all that is it's going to put even more pressure on this regime to get those results on the field. And as you often hear me say, right, winning cures all ails. No one complains.
But that's the paradox. Like, get the results on the field, but we're not going to give you help to get those results. Winning cures all. Does it though? Because if you win, what's the point of having Penix? If you would have to win. You would have to win a Super Bowl. That's it. That's the only thing that could cure this. Because then people are like, "Who cares what happens? We won a Super Bowl." But if you win just like NFC title games, divisions, 12 games, and you don't get that Super Bowl, you will have the question of could we have won more if we would have actually went all in? If we actually would have drafted defensive players or things we needed? If we actually would have filled the roster with players who could have helped us in those 2 years. So now the Falcons have backed themselves into a corner where the only thing that can really be a success is a Super Bowl. That's a horrible place to be. Ladies and gentlemen, let me know in the comments below what you think, especially if you're a Falcons fan. Where do you come down on this? What's your thoughts on Penix, the timeline, Cousins, the whole thing? And if you hear any conspiracies or any reasons why, put that in the comments below as well. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video.